didn't think I was just about flowers, did you? Today, I'm going to show you guys how to draw and paint a salamander with glowing and stunning iridescent crystals. So grab your paints, grab your brushes, and let's make some art. Working today in a small Canson XL watercolor sketchbook. I am working with my Daily Driver watercolor palette, but you can use whatever watercolors you wish to use. I am using a ceramic plate from Dollar Tree as my mixing surface, and I'm going to be working with various rounds for painting. Since this is a start to finish tutorial, we are going to start off by sketching our illustration. So I've gone ahead and done a crosshair across the vertical center and the horizontal center of the paper that allows me to find the center, because I'm going to do a central placement composition for this. You guys can see over to the left hand side in my sketchbook, I have a thumbnail sketch of what I want this illustration to look like in general. And I'm just kind of loosely blocking everything in, holding my mechanical pencil very lightly and making really light marks on the paper. That's going to make it easier to make corrections and to erase if I need to. I'm working with Pentel Red Lead in a Muji mechanical pencil, but feel free to work with whatever works for you. I am also kind of carefully sketching in the crystal clusters. I am actually referencing quartz crystal clusters, and I will be referencing the salamander as well using photo reference from the internet. So if you are drawing, inking, and painting along with me today, I do recommend pulling up some reference. I think I looked up like red eft and larval tiger salamander. That's kind of what I was going for here. So once I've got everything kind of sketched in and placed, I can start tightening up the details and applying a little bit more pressure so that I can see this a little bit more. If you've got good eyesight and you don't need to apply more pressure, don't apply more pressure. But my eyesight is not great, and I wanted to finalize some details, and I wanted you guys to be able to see what I was doing. If you don't feel like drawing along and you just want to color, my patrons over on Patreon have a printable version of the line art. You can get your own by joining them at patreon.com/natosu. So we have our salamander wrapped around a crystal cluster, and I also wanted to have a few breakout crystals here and there, and this is all on top of a bed of moss. So as I pointed out earlier, I am heavily referencing quartz crystals, and I'm not necessarily drawing any one specific cluster. What I'm looking for is general traits that are pretty common among quartz, and then trying to kind of abstract that out and replicate it. So that's how I like to use reference. I generally, unless I'm working from my own photos, I'm not trying to copy exactly what I'm seeing. I'm instead trying to understand the forms, understand the patterns of what I'm looking at, and then I can kind of change it and apply it. So basically I'm trying to figure out the rules of what I'm seeing. So once I have finished sketching in my illustration, it's time to ink. I am inking with a Sakura Pigma FB brush pen. This is one of my favorite brush pens, and what I really like about brush pens is they are capable of a variety of line weights all in one pen, so you only need one pen. But if you're more comfortable with a fixed line weight pen like a felt tip pen or like a technical pen, feel free to use that as well. The other cool thing about the Sakura Pigma FB, in fact, all of the Sakura Pigma pens, is that they are both waterproof and alcohol marker proof. So it should be good for me to paint on top of it. But something else to keep in mind is that I like to allow my inks to cure to the paper for 24 hours before I paint on top of them. I apologize that this is so blasted out, but in general, when I am inking, I work from foreground to background, so objects that overlap other objects, and I work my way back, unless I need to warm up my hand, and then I might pick some less important thing in the background to ink first, and then work on inking the faces. good time to point out to you guys that this video has been time-lapsed by 8X. Please feel free to take breaks. Feel free to take your time. Feel free to take the time that you need to be able to execute art that you'll be happy with. Good art takes time, and please do not take what you see on the internet and think you should work at that same speed. If you work faster, that's great. If you work slower, that's great. Every artist has their own speed, every artist has their own tempo, and every artist has their own methods. I also took a break in between sketching this illustration and inking this illustration, not just the overnight allowing the inks to cure to the paper break, but I think there was actually quite a few days in between the two, and then a significant amount of time passed between when I inked this illustration and when I watercolored it. So, you know, it takes the time it takes. So I am working with my Daily Driver watercolor palette. You can use whatever watercolors you like, whatever watercolors make your heart sing and feel inspiring to you. You guys might in particular want to pull out those neon colors if you have them for this illustration, because that's going to look really cool on the crystals. So I started with some yellow, and then I realized I wanted to do some underpainting and kind of knock some of those shadows in early. So I'm using kind of a neutral tint mix of a little bit of blue with a little bit of mauve, and I am underpainting some of the faces on the crystals just to kind of start blocking in those shadows early. So for this illustration, I want all of the faces of these crystals to be different colors because I want these to be iridescent crystals. And I'm also referencing this as I'm painting. Again, I'm not painting any one crystal in particular, but I'm kind of observing the patterns and observing how the colors play off each other. And I'm trying to make sure I don't have too many colors duplicated in one area. So I'm trying to balance it. I'm going to work one color at a time and block in several areas with that color and then dab in additional colors. So for example, with our yellow, I'm also dabbing in a little of the teal here and there to get this really pretty diffused color, but I'm also applying teal to some of the faces of the crystal as that main face color. And then while that's still wet, maybe I'm picking up a darker bluish green and dabbing it in while it's still wet and allowing the colors to diffuse that way. So what I'm really trying to do is get a myriad of really pretty iridescent appearing colors. So as I mentioned earlier, I am looking at the reference, observing certain trends, and then trying to replicate that in the art. Next, I'm grabbing a purple, again, applying it just to certain faces. And for this, I really want to bring in a lot of wet into wet, a lot of working in an area and allowing the colors to diffuse. So I'm really kind of painting by feel and by whim here. So this is going to vary person to person. Your favorite colors are going to differ from mine. The kind of colors you choose are going to differ from what I chose. You might want to do a monochromatic palette, so pinks and reds and purples. You might want to do a complementary palette, so maybe teals and oranges. It really kind of depends on the vibe that you're going for and what colors you like and what you find appealing. As I mentioned earlier, I thought this would be a great opportunity to kind of lean into some of those neons that I don't use all that often, and that way we can get a really fun pop of color with this illustration. After adding in some of the colors, I decided it was time to add a little bit more shadow because some of the faces were blending in with other crystals. It was difficult to gauge depth. So I'm doing kind of a hybrid between an underpainting and an overpainting. So between a grisé and a glaze, where I am using this sort of bluish tint to start painting in some shadows, to start darkening up some of the colors, and to try and kind of push the contrast a little bit, and so that we can get a little bit more depth with our crystals. Now, you could use atmospheric perspective for this one, especially with our iridescent crystals, and you might decide to have your more brightly colored crystals towards the viewer. So your warm yellows, your hot pinks, your warm lighter purples in the foreground, and then you might decide to have your greens, your blues, your cooler purples in the background, and that's going to create a little bit of atmospheric perspective. It's going to give a sense of depth. Was I that smart when doing this one? No, but hindsight is 2020, and at least I am able to share what I have learned from this with you guys. I've got a lot of the colors on the crystals blocked in, so now I can start going in with some thicker, more saturated mixes. And I'm not really trying to cover all of the area. I'm kind of trying to just add in zones and to create kind of a lighting effect. Again, if you look up iridescent crystals, you'll probably see what I mean. In the areas where the light's hitting the crystal very strongly, they cast a reflection and the color is a little more pastel, a little more muted because it's reflecting the light. In the areas that are maybe not in shadow, but aren't necessarily being hit directly by light or a little further away from the light source, you can see more of the local color clearly. These crystals, the color palette for these crystals are kind of giving me circus vibes, but I might be spending too much time on TikTok. So basically for something like these crystals, we're kind of going by vibes. What looks good to you, what works for you, what makes you feel like these are done. And I'm all about art being vibes because we are painting for fun. We're painting for enjoyment. So whatever sparks your inspiration, you can leave them very pastel. You can add some really bold colors. I really wanted to lean into like the wet into wet color shifts that we can get. So while some of the more saturated colors are still wet, I'm adding in a contrast or a darker version of that color to kind of create the illusion of iridescence. I'm really trying to figure out how to make these crystals look iridescent, since this is something that a technique, a way of thinking, a texture, I guess, that I don't paint all that often. So I thought this would be a really fun exercise to try and see if I could replicate that look. I'm going to point this out here because it is going to come up later on that at this point on the stark white of the page, the crystals do look a little bit weird. This is going to be a trust the process though. Let's block in our salamander and let's block in our moss and block in our background before we really decide how we feel about everything. Would it really be me if I didn't pull out a spray bottle of clean water to spray everything that's done to get it to move around and make a mess? I didn't think so. Haven't yet, now is a good time to switch out your cup of water and grab a clean ceramic plate so we can get started on painting the salamander. I'm going to start with a base color of this warm yellow, and that's gonna, okay, so if you guys have ever watched me paint fly agaric, same sort of thought process, okay? So while that's still wet into wet, I am going to dab in some of this kind of burnt orange color. It's Sennelier's Chinese orange, if you guys are curious. And then I'm also going to dab in a little bit of scarlet. So I'm working section by section so we can ensure that we're working wet into wet and we get that really pretty color diffusion, and that's going to allow us to build up our color. So I started with the head, then I did the hind legs, and then I did the tail. And I know I said scarlet, it's kind of looking like I'm grabbing scarlet, or it might be alizarin crimson. So scarlet is going to be a warmer, brighter red. Alizarin is going to be a cooler, darker red. While that is drying, I'm going to start filling in the moss. I'm using Hooker's Green for this. Again, with this, you can use whatever colors you like, and whatever colors you find inspiring. You can paint whatever kind of salamander you want to paint. You can even go really psychedelic with your colors. It's up to you if you are drawing and painting along. This is just meant to be kind of sketchbook inspiration, some ideas for your sketchbook, and some stuff to draw in case you're feeling bored or uninspired. So using the round, I am doing kind of small stippling brush strokes with a more saturated version of our Hooker's Green mix, and I applied that after that first layer dried so that we can get some contrast. So this is called wet over dry, and it allows us to build up layers in our watercolors. They're some of the techniques I use the most often. So once that had a chance to dry, I'm going to start working on our second layer on our salamander, working between Chinese orange and probably alizarin crimson. And again, I'm working in segments so that I can ensure that we're working wet into wet. So I'm using a 2-brush method, where one brush contains the Chinese orange, the other contains the alizarin crimson, and that allows me to work faster. I'm not constantly washing out colors and switching between colors. You can probably paint this with just one brush. Just kind of pace yourself and be patient with yourself. And I'm also using these metal Chinese watercolor weights. I love these things. They are so much easier for me to use than clips. If you've got a paperweight, it will probably fulfill the same need, but so easy to use. If you guys are looking for the materials that I'm working with, you can find them listed out for you guys down in the description below. So now I want to start working on the background. So I grabbed a small ceramic sauce dish from my local Asian market, and I grabbed a granulating purple for this. And what I want to do is create a glow effect with our crystals. So I'm applying an area of our purple and then using a separate brush, washing it back out around the crystals with a little bit of clean water. Once that's had a chance to fully dry, I am going to adjust the color in my little sauce dish. I'm darkening it up, and I'm going in for a second layer because I really want that glow effect. And to achieve a glow effect, you have to have contrast, right? Everything can't just be light colored. It's not going to look like it's glowing. You need dark color, and that provides the contrast so that the viewer can tell it's glowing. So I pulled out some masking fluid. I'm using a synthetic watercolor brush that has some brush soap worked into it. And I'm using a sheet of copier paper as a mask to protect the area where I don't want the masking fluid to hit. And I splattered on some masking fluid onto the background. And now I'm going to let that dry, and I'm going to start working on the eyes of our salamander. I wanted to have these really beautiful gold eyes. So I am using some Quin Gold. And while that dries, I am doing another layer. This time I think I am working with lamp black, but it might be Payne's gray. Applying it to the background allowed it to dry. Now I'm doing another layer, trying to build up those colors to do what? To create a glow effect. And I'm only applying color to the background after the masking fluid has 100% dried. I'm also using a thicker, more saturated mix of our black and a smaller round brush to apply the little black freckles on our red effed salamander. I think these things are so cute. When I was a girl, I was obsessed with newts and salamanders. I thought they were just so pretty, and I spent so much time looking for them, and I used to keep newts as pets. So I have a lot of fondness for our for our little amphibious friends here. I think they're just absolutely adorable. So once that first layer of our little freckles dried, I'm going to go in and add some more. And you really want to vary the size of the freckles, and you're really applying more of an oval or kind of like a stamp from the top of the brush than you are a circle. And that's going to give it a more realistic and more natural look. That eye's looking a little bit weird there, so we're going to go ahead and fill it in with lamp black as well, and that adds a whole lot of personality to our little salamander. So at this point, it's just about tweaking details, adjusting things, like for example, adding another layer on our moss. I have, boy, I said that really weird. I grabbed a more blue sort of green color. It's probably undersea green. That's like my favorite color to paint with, especially for moss. That's probably what I grabbed, but I may have grabbed a teal or a blue green to create contrast with all the red so that our salamander pops. And what I really kind of wanted this to look like was like the salamander was guarding the crystal cluster, kind of a reference to like dragons guarding their treasure. Now that the background is dried, I'm going to use a masking fluid frisket. You can get these at Dollar Tree to pick up the masking fluid, revealing these little speckles of lighter color, which I hope contributes to the glow effect that I was going for. So we are almost done, but I want to add a few pops of yellow to the moss just to add some light and some liveliness. And I'm also going to use some white gouache, and I am going to splatter it onto the crystals in our background using the same masking technique that I used earlier. I'm also adding some white gouache highlights to the eyes and to the skin of our salamander. They have really shiny, glossy, and moist skin, and that's something I wanted to convey by adding just a little highlight of gouache here and there. I'm also going to add highlights of gouache as rim lighting on the crystals to kind of help delineate the different faces of the crystals and to kind of help it stand out more. This is a piece that had like a significant ugly phase. This is a piece where you have to trust the process, and you have to trust that completing more of the colors, more of the illustration, balancing things out and paying attention to what you're doing can really help save the piece. Because if this was just on the crystals themselves, and you guys see me adjusting some of the colors as I go, because I'm like, oh, you know, I want some more hot pink here, or I want to kind of adjust the colors and make them more vibrant. It was not vibrant enough for my taste, right? So like, this is an example of paying attention and thinking about what you're doing and thinking critically can take a sketchbook illustration that you feel kind of meh about and really make you enjoy it and see the beauty in it. In fact, I like this little guy so much that he is available as a glow in the dark sticker, I think. If he isn't, he will be soon. It was like this or another design that I really liked for glow in the dark, and I'd have to double check that. ADHD strikes again. But I am using my synthetic brush again to add some rim lighting on the crystal faces, and that's just going to help delineate things and help clean things up so you guys can kind of see those faces. And I'm also finding masking fluid that I didn't quite get the first time, so I'm using my frisket to pick it up as I go along. Watercolor has been applied, our gouache has been applied, and I decided I wanted to re-ink this just a little bit, clean things up, adjust the contrast, and just kind of make it easier to read. This is a totally optional stage. You may not find that you need to do this. I felt like I needed to do it because painting on top of a black line art muddied it, and that kind of skews the contrast, and I felt like it would just look so much cleaner, crisper, and frankly sticker-like if I went ahead and I re-inked those outlines. Of course, it wouldn't be me if I didn't want to encourage some chaos, so of course I pull out the spray bottle at the very last minute when I thought it was done and sprayed the crystals and the background a little bit just to get a little bit of color movement, to kind of loosen things up, to get the party started and liven things up and get these colors to move a little bit. There you have it. Together, you and I have completed another sketchbook start to finish watercolor illustration. I hope I was able to inspire you guys to draw, to ink, to paint today. If I even inspire just one of those things, that is phenomenal, and I am greatly appreciative of you hanging out with me today and making some art with me. Huge thanks to my amazing patrons on Patreon. You guys make tutorials like this possible. Thank you guys so much. I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and I hope to see you guys again really soon with another art supply review or tutorial. Bye guys!